While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Tim Jackson, your host, and I'm here with another very special guest, Dr. Molly Maloof. Dr. Maloof is passionate about extending health span through her medical practice, personal brand, entrepreneurial, and educational endeavors. She is passionate about optimizing health through food, technology, and psychedelics. She provides personalized medicine to world-class entrepreneurs, investors, and executives. Since 2012, she has worked as an advisor or consultant to over 50 companies in the digital health, consumer health, and biotechnology industries. She has been an educator since medical school and pioneered a course on health span for 3 years at Stanford University. She is the founder of Adamo Bioscience, a company that aims to reveal how the science of love can unlock the capacity for healing, connection, and creation within everyone. We're taking a platform approach to creating a variety of products and services that increase and enhance love within and between individuals. Welcome, Dr. Molly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you're involved in so many different things, and I know you have been on the top podcast and you're highly sought after. So welcome and thanks for sharing your knowledge. I wanted to touch on the new book, The Spark Factor, Supercharge Your Batteries for Limitless Energy and a Fitter, Stronger, More Resilient Future. What made you passionate to write this book?
Well, I had been teaching at Stanford, and I really felt like the stuff that I was teaching really should make it out to the masses. And, my practice has always worked with these really talented people, and Stanford students, are some of the best in the world, but it's not enough to just teach the elite. You have to let everyone else know what you're learning. And so I really wanted to kind of get out of the sort of ivory tower and the Silicon Valley bubble and try to just reach out to more of the masses. And I spent a lot of time in the Midwest during the pandemic. And I just realized that I had been living in a sort of very sheltered San Francisco existence where it was really easy to be healthy. Like the culture of food is really it's really easy to go to a farmer's market there. And, they have really fresh vegetables and really high quality meat. And then I moved to the Midwest and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I forgot how hard it is to be healthy in America. And how long it takes for information from the innovation space to mainstream. So it takes about 15 years from research to go from the bench to the bedside. And I'm on average many years ahead of the curve. I wanted to really talk a lot about metabolism in this book and mastering the stress response and maintaining connection and getting enough movement in your life, because these are all the biggest drivers of mitochondrial health or mitochondrial dysfunction if you lack these things. And so the book's largely a book on biohacking for women, but it's really fundamentally a book on mitochondria and a book on health span. How do you live as long as possible without disease?
Can you kind of operationally define for our listeners what health span is?
Yeah, so health span is the number of years that you live healthy without any disease or disability. So like my grandmothers, both of them ended up frail and immobile. And mobility is a really big problem when you get older. If you lose your muscle strength, you lose your mobility. When you lose your mobility, you lose your ability to maintain those muscles. And muscles are like mitochondrial battery packs. They're like power plants, basically. And so it's really important if you want to live a long time to maintain that muscle mass. And then your bone structure, if you don't have healthy bones, you will break if you fall. If you have a bad hip, people die within a lot of people will die within a year of getting a hip fracture. And it can drastically reduce quality of life. So I'm trying to help young people and middle-aged people really think about their longevity now so that they don't end up frail or diseased with the major chronic diseases like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and dementia. These top killers are largely related to mitochondrial dysfunction, in my opinion, according to a lot of people. And long COVID. People don't talk about how long COVID is basically chronic fatigue syndrome, but what is chronic fatigue? It's mitochondrial dysfunction. It affects viruses and intracellular infections. They get inside the cell, they hide from the immune system, and they hijack your metabolic machinery so that they can grow themselves, so they can live. And so I started just asking, what is the first principles of health? And I really came to this conclusion really about capacity. And it's about having enough energy to maintain the integrity of the structure. And like, I recently did this major biohack where I went and I did 5 days of NAD plus therapy in Sedona. I came back feeling like I was 20 again. And I promptly went to a music festival and, enjoyed my time. But it was really crazy how just boosting energy production directly in the mitochondria could just immediately give you just this like better mood. It'll give you better energy. You're just happier. You're more vital. You just like feel like you have enough to go around, and when we hit middle age, if we don't take care of ourselves, we start losing energy capacity. And like this word capacity is going to come up a lot because if you're into physics at all, like there's a word called capacitance or capacitor, and your mitochondria are like batteries where they can store charge in electrochemical gradient, or they can store charge across like two membranes. And my capacitance like directs charge quickly. You can just like immediately use the energy. Battery power is like backup power, right? So we have these really cool organelles in our cells that all we know about them from high school is that they're power plants. But then I got really obsessed with like, well, what does this mean? Like, what does it mean to have power in our cells? What does it mean to like lose power? And you can see this in like power outages, like everything in your house breaks, right? Nothing works. Your fridge starts leaking. Same thing happens in the body. If you lose your energy, then everything starts to go downhill. Nothing works. And this is why long COVID affects so many different organ systems, because it's an energy deficiency disease. It's not a disease of like, it's not just like, everyone's like, oh, it's hard to understand. Like I figured this stuff out in 2019. And then I was like, oh, wow, viruses cause chronic infections, and viruses cause chronic fatigue. And oh, wow, we haven't had a pandemic in about 100 years. I don't know, 100 years. We're kind of overdue.
Yeah.
And before you know it, we have a pandemic. And I'm like, oh, wow, it sounds like we're going to actually like probably have a really big problem because we're going to have a lot of people out of work. And, if I just love to see things in like a micro scale and a macro scale. And I think when you can look at life that way, it can help you understand patterns in existence that make more sense.
Absolutely. I talk a lot about chronic infections and microbial mitochondriopathy. So basically stealth pathogens, creating cytokine storms, damage the mitochondria, and then, it's sort of self-perpetuating. So your body temperature drops. There's two ways to change the function of a protein: change the temperature, change the pH. And you definitely, when your temperature drops, your immune function, your ATP and energy production goes down. So I'm right there with you. And I think that's really insightful. Can you talk about the biggest threats that you see to mitochondrial health today?
For young people, I'd say it's like vaping and smoking and alcohol, the toxins in the environment. But those are like the obvious ones, right? But the less obvious thing is like all the overconsumption of processed foods and high fat, high carb, ultra processed foods that don't have any nutrient value. It's like you're shoving fuel into an engine that can't handle all the fuel. It's like
Right.
so much it's like literally overfueling breaks the engine and it causes overheating. You know, when you overheat an engine and a car stops working? Well,
Hmm.
inflammation is basically what happens when you shove so much ultra processed food into that mitochondria. It's
Right.
like it cannot, it's called it's basically like a traffic jam. And it needs to just, it's like trying to decide, am I going to metabolize carbs or fats? Like it doesn't like to do large amounts of carbs and fats at the same time. And so it just ends up like my personal belief is that like liver fat and visceral fat is like when you can't metabolize all the fuel in your body, where's it going to go? It's going to leak out, right? Where's it going to go? It's going to leak into the viscera, right? It's got to go
Right.
through somewhere. And like if it can't be worked through the cells because the cells are overloaded, well, it's going to fill up the liver. It's going to fill up the viscera. So we make metabolic disease so complicated. I just think it's actually pretty simple. Like people are eating the wrong foods and they're eating way too much of them. And overconsumption of too many calories of the wrong foods, especially foods that have no nutrient density and foods that are, you know, filled with chemical preservatives and all sorts of crap that you don't need, like sugar and like ultra processed industrialized vegetable oils, you know, like specifically the ones that are fried that become rancid very quickly. Like that is not conducive to health. And like everyone knows this, but nobody asks why. And I'm just like, well, what's going on in the cell? And so the mitochondria just cannot tolerate this level of metabolic stress. On top of that, the mitochondria are actually responsible for directing energy. Like, where is it going to go? It actually is like sensing and integrating the environment. And it's like, do I need to defend against an invader? Do I need to survive? Or can I be peaceful and relaxed? And can I maybe reproduce? And it's always asking, like, where am I in this world? What's going on outside? And it's these are little antennas of consciousness that are like trying to take in information and react and respond. And as a result, like people don't totally understand how much stress and chronic stress, especially like even things like caregiving stress are particularly damaging, right? People who are under chronic unrelenting stress, their immune systems break down, right? They like your mitochondria are not just making energy and sensing, integrating signals, but they're also figuring out, okay, am I going to go make stress hormones or am I going to go make sex hormones? And it literally like they play a role in the actual manufacturing and production of these hormones. And I'm like, whoa, when I figured that out, I was like, what don't they do? You know?
So you're referring to
Do
the
so
cell
many things.
danger response, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So our listeners, we had Ari Witten on as our first guest,
He's
and
great.
yeah, he's great, and he talks a lot about the cell danger response and Dr. Navio's work.
Yep.
But how can we harness what Ari and many people refer to as hormetic stressors to
Yeah.
improve the health of the mitochondria?
Well, I mean, first, I will actually kind of like break something down for listeners because I realized on Instagram yesterday that a lot of people are really confused about biohacking. And I'm going to do a longer video on my website that kind of summarizes this. But you really have to ask yourself, where are you in the stress response? Okay. Are you in the state of feeling overwhelmed, feeling like you're in the alarm phase, high cortisol, feeling totally like waking up in the morning, jumping out of bed, like can barely sleep at night, like being, you know, just like anxious first thing in the morning? Are you feeling like you need to act on something? You need to get out of bed and do something, right? Like, and you feel kind of like you get tired, but you're very wired all the time.
Right.
You know, coffee is no longer really working for you. It's making you more stressed out. And in general, like cortisol's high, right? So if your cortisol is really high, you're not going to want to go and do a lot of mitohormetic stressors because you already have a stress cup, right? The stress cup is already filled up. So if you pour a bunch of mitohormetic stressors in the stress cup, you know, you're going to overflow it. Now, I think a little bit of sauna in this situation, a little bit of weightlifting, not trying to hit your personal best necessarily, but just like using these as tools for fitness, not going to harm you, but you definitely want to lean towards gentler things, right? Like not overdoing it in the gym, really giving your body a lot of space for recovery. PEMF mats, like acupressure mats and, you know, biomats and all the things that you can do, like foam rolling, like all the recovery practices, like, and definitely wean off coffee. And, you know, I'm drinking mud water right now because I had to wean off coffee because I got my Dutch test back and my cortisol was high. because I am doing too many things this year. But when your stress levels are balanced and you feel good, you feel strong, cortisol levels are normal, you feel great when you wake up in the morning, you have enough energy to tackle your day, you maybe like training, you can start doing things like cold plunge. You can start doing that hot and cold sauna back and forth. That's gonna basically, the hot sauna and the cold plunge is gonna like tune your nervous system to make you stronger. You know, a little bit of HIIT training is going to be great for sending that signal to make more mitochondria. You know, getting proper amounts of aerobic and anaerobic exercise, making sure that you like, you know, if you, like breath work is a fantastic tool. I mean, Wim Hof, like definitely not great for your high cortisol people or your low cortisol people, but for your people who are balanced, awesome stuff. Otherwise, I would do like, you know, we'll talk about other types of breath work later, but mitohormetic stressors are the kind of stress that makes you stronger. So when you are strong and healthy to begin with, this can make you better. Problem is that people don't know when to use these things. And so they end up using them in the wrong times and they end up hurting themselves. So like if your cortisol is really low, you are burned out, you are struggling to maintain your blood sugar overnight. You literally commit, you get out of bed and you start getting, you feel like you're going to pass out when you stand up because your blood pressure can't maintain itself. You really need more salt. You have a hard time with, you know, your HRV is tanked. You know, like these are all examples of like low cortisol states means you are burned out and you need to take care of yourself and recover. You know, your entire imperative should be very light gym work, mostly yoga, walks, lots and lots of rest, like as much sleep as you need. And I even throw in like Dr. Wilson's adrenal rebuilder or like adrenal glandulars, or people will sometimes use licorice, or in, you know, really bad cases, where people are just completely flatlined cortisol, I'll throw in a little bit of hydrocortisone, like 5 to 15 milligrams, just to reestablish that rhythm. Not for long, maybe like 2 to 3 months max. So it's key to understand, like if you are burned out, you're not going to get better by adding a bunch of hormetic stressors because you're running on empty. You know, that cup's overflown and tipped over. So you got to just like put that cup back up and start refilling, you know, start building it back up, you know. Yeah. And when I tell people this, like they start to get it, but a lot of people who are talking about hormesis and, you know, and health, they're like I would never recommend fasting for someone who's burned out, you know, even for somebody who's like really high cortisol, like fasting is not going to help you. But fasting's great for people who are healthy, like a little bit of intermittent fasting, like ending that overnight fast early. But if you have low cortisol, like that fast is not going to help you and you're just going to end up suffering more, you know? So it's like so key to understand this stuff. And like, even with food. So if you're high cortisol, you're going to notice that your blood sugar is going to go higher because it makes you more insulin resistant. So you got to get high protein, balanced meals, not too much of the really, really, really high carb meals. Like those are not going to do you well, but you definitely are going to need some carbohydrate and balanced, and ideally protein and fat and fiber first, and then the carbohydrate. Now, if you're burned out, you got to be a lot more vigilant about, like, these are the people who actually do need to eat a few small meals throughout the day just to stay stable because their blood sugar is constantly dropping. And in that situation, you really want to just focus on like consistency of just nutrient. And I would put a blood sugar monitor on and making sure that you're not dropping super low at night. So these are the people who I would actually recommend a snack before bed. Most people I would recommend do not eat after dinner, but people who are low cortisol, they need to be a little bit more careful, and that having like a little bit of protein or fat before they go to sleep can tie them over overnight. So it's like so important to like use these mitohormetic stressors like ketosis and carb cycling when you're really healthy. I think you can do some carb cycling when your cortisol is high, but I wouldn't recommend. I would just do totally consistency and like send consistent signals of health to your body when you're burned out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of like the same thing as people who experience some emotional or psychological stress and they say, oh, I'm going to hit the gym really hard today. Well, your body's already overloaded with stress. So, you know,
I mean, I'm not saying don't go to the gym, just use it to recover, you know, right. Like do like 10 minutes on the ski machine or like or on rowing, you know, and like then lift some weights, but don't hit the super heavy weights, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with going to the gym. I just think a lot of people use it as a crutch.
Berries, you know, berries 5 days a week, 6 days a week. I'm like, what the heck? There's evidence that suggests that over 90 minutes of HIIT training a week damages mitochondrial health.
Right.
So if that's the case, then that is not helping people. You know, This Orange Theory berries crap, like, I don't care how good you look, you might be hurting yourself.
Right, right, absolutely. I mean, I see people recommending all the time, like, oh, everyone should fast, everyone should do a ketogenic diet. But that kind of brings me to the point of metabolic flexibility. Can you
Yeah.
define that and sort of tie that into your previous points?
Sure. So metabolic flexibility is the ability to shift between carbohydrate and fat metabolism. And it's one of those things that I don't think anybody's completely figured out yet on how to like design a program around this. But I would say that it is real. I mean, like ideally, your goal is that like when you eat a higher carb food, you're able to metabolize it and keep your body in the normal healthy range. And when you eat a lower carb meal, your body can switch to fat metabolism. Or when you go into fasting, your body's able to like burn all your glycogen up and transition into transition into like fat metabolism. So that ability to make that switch is a sign of metabolic flexibility. And so when people start getting into fasting, they start, learning, oh, that's what it feels like to be hitting ketosis. I know what ketosis smells like, like you can smell it on your body. And when people start learning how to be fat adapted, they start realizing, wow, some people who are really obese and really metabolically flexible, it can take them literally months to get fat adapted. Like if they want to go on a ketogenic diet. I would say that for people who are sedentary and obese and not too stressed, that fasting and ketosis is like certainly a path to getting a better metabolic health. But once you are in better metabolic health, you may find that your metabolism shifts and you actually need to start eating more carbs again. And you might not fast as much because your body is like, maybe you're exercising more. So what I noticed is when I was dealing with metabolic dysfunction, I was starting to fast to lower that fasting glucose. I was draining all that fat out of my liver and I was really improving liver insulin sensitivity. I was increasing my exercise. I was increasing that muscle insulin sensitivity. But once I got in better shape and once I got more fit, it was like my body didn't need as much fasting. It just
Right.
like naturally, because you're exercising and fasting have a lot of the similar benefits. They both promote autophagy. They both just like stimulate mitochondrial quality control. So they're both really good tools for mitochondrial function. So people who are really hardcore exercisers don't necessarily need to fast a lot. But that being said, I've met athletes who are metabolically inflexible and super carb adapted because all they do is endurance exercise and all they do is carb, 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 carb. And then if they don't have goo or gel or gummies during their race, they bonk. And
Right.
so that is in itself not metabolic flexibility. So in these people, you would want them to start doing nutritional periodization, where they start doing a few training low sessions, where they start training with lower carb meals in order to just, it's like a weighted vest. It's like you want to put on that weighted vest so that you can just like give yourself some conditioning benefits of training on lower glycogen. And like that will help you flip the metabolic switch too. These people need coaches, honestly, because it's hard to do this on their own. But I have seen so many endurance athletes totally carb dependent and actually inhibit their performance because they actually can't, when they run out of fuel, they can't tap into their glycogen stores. And then I had a friend who had not even trained for a marathon. I taught her how to fast using a CGM. She was competing against her friend who had been training in endurance exercise. And her friend literally had been training for weeks on a high carb diet. And she failed, that she like dropped out of the race. And my friend who'd been only like had not trained at all finished it. And I
Wow.
think it was largely because she was more metabolically flexible, was able to burn her own fat.
Yeah. So do you think it's possible to do triathlons or run marathons and still be healthy in terms of muscle mass and not in a catabolic state?
I mean, I wouldn't run. These are performance environments, right? Like, I wouldn't recommend that like people do. But like, if I were like running marathons, and I was like doing it regularly, I would have a coach, and I would have a coach, and I would wear all the devices, and I would really work on building metabolic flexibility in the context of a coaching environment. But I would definitely recommend if you can get fuel during a race, it's going to help your performance a lot. Most people are going to do a lot better in their racing if they have fuel. I mean, it's just, you're going to feel better, you're going to run faster. But if you don't have access to fuel, then you want to be able to finish the race without it, and like your body has this natural capacity to shift into fat metabolism. If you are under, I went, so here's the thing, there's a component of stress in all of this that nobody wants to talk about, but like the stress piece is really key. So if you are under enormous stress, you are going to actually deal with more muscle metabolism, because your body's just going to be like, I'm going to grab all of that glucose from whatever source I can, because stress craves glucose. Okay. Like, it's just the way we're designed. It's like, it literally is our programming. Go find like easy to metabolize and store fuel. Carbs are easy to metabolize and easy to store. Now, if you're not super stressed out, like, you will find that your body will just like naturally shift in to fat metabolism. Fat metabolism. Everything just works better with low stress. But we're not living in a time of low stress. We're living in a time of extraordinary stress. We have just had a extraordinarily tumultuous pandemic. We had a massive economic change. We are going into a recession. There's a war in Ukraine. There's genocide happening in China. China wants to take Taiwan. We've got elections coming up. There's Roe versus Wade just happened. Women are feeling attacked. Like, you name it. There's mass school shootings. Like, and then, oh yeah, the ice caps are melting. So like, I just listed like 11 existential threats right now to like our existence. And that is not normal. Okay. Like, we are living in a particularly tumultuous time. And so I think it's really key for people to understand, like, it's okay if you don't want to do the hardcore biohacks right now. It's okay if you don't want to do a bunch of fasting. It's okay if you don't feel like doing ketosis. Like, I would say for most people, if most people, like, there's 45% of women are burned out right now. Those women listening should be focusing on healing from burnout. And for the rest of us who are like high cortisol, we need to also recover. We need to find balance. We need to take more vacations. You know, like, I am an achiever, and I am like somebody who is nonstop trying to just like press on to what's next. I know that I have overdone it this year. Like, and it's partially because there's some people during high stress, they're going to shut off, and they're just going to kind of like become depressed, anxious, sad, internally oriented, less social. But then there's people like me who just like are biased towards action. So the more stress that I have, the more that I do. And so it's like, I think everybody needs to pause right now, and everybody needs to take a breath, and we all need to come together and start connecting more. And I'd love to talk about the role of human connection and health, because I don't think it's talked enough on podcasts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, humans are naturally social creatures. And if we look back in the day when a certain person got sick in a village, everyone rallied to help that person get better. And then they returned the favor when it happened to someone else. So let's talk about that lack of connection, sort of being an invisible man or woman, especially in the city. Like last night, handing out candy, I just met my neighbor, and I've been living here 6 months. So let's talk about that lack of connection, and conversely, how positive connection leads to healing.
Yeah. So basically, the biggest factor we know in long-term health and happiness is human connection. And on the flip side, negative relationships is extraordinarily associated with stress and lack of thriving. And so lack of connection, at least in animal studies, like social, even and human studies, by the way, like really animals do not thrive alone. Like we're meant to be connected. Like, it's part of our design. So if you put one of the ways that they actually induce depression in animal studies is they just isolate animals. They just keep them from they just isolate them. And like inevitably they will just become depressed. And so knowing that, it's really surprising. It's really, really surprising that the government was just like, let's just isolate everybody. That'll somehow fix the problem. And yeah, of course, I think it did maybe try to flatten the curve. But I look at this whole isolation movement as like, it's had residual effects. We have more diseases of despair. We have more addiction. We had like over 100,000 extra deaths from addiction. We have had mass shootings going up and up and up, and lots of domestic abuse, child abuse. It's really a huge problem that we don't talk enough about. And I just think that we should be teaching people in schools, like, about the nature of connection and love, and like what it does to help us thrive, and like how lack of love literally creates the conditions of mental illness. Like,
and probably not, we shouldn't be putting kids with plexiglass around their desks.
Absolutely not. I mean, first of all, how is that going to fix anything? How is that going to like prevent people from getting illnesses? Like, it's just not, it doesn't make sense, you know? And the people who are in charge, I'm just like, how is it that they're running this country? Like, it's crazy. So I started studying human connection because I was really blown away by just like the fact that it seemed like such a major opportunity for public health interventions. And yet it was being overlooked so much. And it's like, we could create a movement towards connection. We could put it in workplaces. We could put it in schools. We could put it in like community centers and homes and churches, and like the government could promote it, and it would do more for the health of this country than almost any other endeavor. And like eating together with others, like families, like I grew up in a family where we ate together every night. And I just really find that it's so important to actually have people connect and have people spend time sharing meals and also exercise. It's really great to do group sports. It's really great to go to gyms. Gyms are particularly good for you because of the human connection piece. And so like I think it's actually easier to get healthy if you have people around you. I think it's way harder to do it on your own. Part of the reason why trainers exist is because of the fact that somebody watching them and being with them actually takes some of the pain away from the experience of exercising. And it's less confusing. Like I learned how to lift weights because one of my ex-boyfriends was a bodybuilder and he taught me how to lift weights. And so we're meant to come together. Like we have this biological imperative, right? It's to first and foremost, we need to survive. And then it's like, how do I connect? And connection is also part of survival, which I learned, because connection is when we come together and we share information and resources and we create proximity. And proximity is the leading factor we know in dating. It actually is like the largest factor in the chances of someone ending up with someone else is like, it's literally the proximity they have to someone else. So I just think it's super, super cool and interesting to think about how it would just be great if more people would emphasize this specific thing right now, like during the moment we're in right now, because of the stress levels. Like I wrote this book. I started writing this book before the pandemic started. I started my proposal in 2019. And it's funny because like a lot of the stuff that went into this book was stuff that was highly relevant prior to the pandemic. And I think it's still very relevant, but I'm on podcast trying to explain to people like we have a lot more people burned out right now. And a lot more people are going to be unable to do some of the biohacks that are in the book. So my job right now is to like teach people how to recover from stress. And the biggest way to do that is more oxytocin comes from more human connection and more human touch. When you hold a baby, you get oxytocin. When you touch your family and friends and you get a massage, you get oxytocin. Oxytocin is an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. It's cardioprotective. It enhances social bonds. It makes us feel safe. We feel trusted and we feel connected. And so I'm just like, preaching from the rooftops, like this would be really great if everybody were to emphasize this more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times people get hung up on making touch into something just sexual versus, I could hug a guy friend of mine or a platonic female friend. And that's, going to help with the stress response and the vagal tone, if you will. So I don't want people to think that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just romantic relationships, it's also just friendships.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. And so when you mentioned monitoring blood sugar, do you use a continuous glucose monitor to do that, or what's your preferred method?
I have been using CGM since 2014. So I was one of the first doctors in Silicon Valley to adopt these because I like kind of discovered it when I was doing some research for a company that was trying to develop a microneedle patch. And I was like, I wonder why these aren't put on healthy people, because I had borderline prediabetes and I didn't even know it. And I was like, how is this a thing? How is it possible that I have borderline prediabetes and I'm young and healthy? And then I realized, oh my God, 1 in 3 people have prediabetes and 80% of them don't even know it. And it's like bananas to me that the government is not more vigilant about this, because everyone should just get a CGM once a year from the government, just to be like, where are you? Where's your metabolism? Are you adapting or not? We get these spot checks in the doctor's office. We get a CMP once a year if you're lucky, if you ask nicely. We get blood pressure checks, but we're not getting blood sugar checks regularly, right?
Right.
And they're just starting to really change these guidelines to recommend more and more diabetes prevention testing, but I'm just like, why, if you could get a snapshot, if you can get like a blood test for like, $10, or you can get like a CGM, which is like hundreds of data points over the course of 2 weeks, plus patterns in the signal. Why wouldn't you do that? Because it's going to give you so much more information about yourself. And like, problem is that most people don't even understand how to use it. I mean, I started using this and I was like, okay, how do I understand this curve? So I started breaking it down. And the first thing you want to look at is your fasting glucose in the morning. Like, what are you waking up with? And the second thing you want to look at is how do you respond to meals? Where does your body go after a higher carb meal? And then you want to ask yourself, well, what happens on average with my curve? Is it really, really noisy? Or is it like really stable? And then you want to ask yourself, like, well, when am I eating? Like, exactly. And am I eating like all day, all night? Or am I like ending my meal at dinner and then being done with food? Or am I eating a late night snack? That's going to impair heart rate variability. It's going to impair sleep. It's just not healthy to eat late at night, unless of course you have burnout and you can't maintain your blood sugar overnight. Then you're someone who probably needs a snack. So I just wish that everyone had this knowledge. And so I put this in the book because I wanted to give people the ranges they should be looking for. And then what do you do if you have a problem? So I've literally broken down like how to improve insulin sensitivity, how to improve fasting glucose, how to improve postprandial glucose, and how to understand meal timing, how to understand if you have good, better, or best blood sugar. And I did all of this for people because I'd never found this anywhere in any book, because it took me years to figure this out. Literally years. I mean, I worked for, and I built a few companies around this. I was really early. The danger of being too early to something is that you just aren't it's not the right timing for it,
Right. Absolutely. And I know you mentioned blood sugar spikes, but reactive hypoglycemia, do you see that as a common cause for middle of the night awakenings?
Yeah. So when someone goes to bed and eats a bunch of sugar, like maybe a bowl of sorbet, and their blood sugar, and they don't have good blood sugar stability, they're going to see a big spike. And especially if that spike goes above 140, their body's like, alarm, pump out extra insulin. And it starts pumping out all this extra insulin. Insulin is the hormone of storage. It's like store. This is not good. My blood sugar is too high. Your body wants to regulate itself. So it pumps out all that extra insulin and then pushes your blood sugar down below 70. And now you have hypoglycemia. And so everyone's like, oh, I'm hypoglycemic. Well, no, most people, like, okay, there's two situations that most people just need to understand about hypoglycemia that are the most common. The first is reactive hypoglycemia. Somebody who's having big spikes and drops is not hypoglycemic. They are reacting to their poor diet and their insulin resistance. But somebody who is burned out may just be dropping low because they can't maintain their blood sugar, because they're just like so flat with because cortisol's job is to get you out of danger. It's a stress hormone. It's like literally designed to help you think your way out of danger by raising your blood sugar so you can get away from danger and you can fuel your brain. And like in that situation, it's just like, okay, what happens next? Well, like your body, if you're like chronically stressed over and over and over and again for literally months on end, there's this thing called negative feedback, and your cortisol will stop. Your brain's going to get the signal of cortisol. If it doesn't stop getting that signal, then it's going to start sending the signal, oh, I should really turn this down, because like this seems like it's out of control, this number. And so your brain will be like, I'm just going to stop making so much cortisol. And that's when you start hitting the burnout.
Absolutely. So we talked about metabolic flexibility and how to sort of gauge your hormetic stressors and your use of them, based on your metabolic flexibility and total stress load. I think a lot of people think of stress as just, getting in an argument with someone or getting stuck in traffic. But I talk a lot about internal stressors like chronic infections, heavy metal toxicity. So, you can have $8 million in the bank and, not have to work, and you're living on the beach and still be stressed, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, mold. Let's talk about mold for a second. I mean, literally, one of my friends has this company that installs sensors in like homes and basements and crawl spaces to like basically predict if there's going to be a problem in the future.
Wow.
Kind of like sensors for your body, sensors for your house. And they were measuring the humidity and the mold in houses in the South because they wanted to see, like, should they be, addressing this problem. And they found mold in every single crawl space in every single house that they saw in the South. So that's just the South. I mean, talk about San Francisco, LA. I mean, Austin has a lot of mold. Like, mold is a really big problem. And Dave Asprey totally brought it to our attention. I thought it was absolutely bonkers crazy, but it's not. Like, mold toxicity, it can really damage your immune system. It can really hurt your health. I had some mold toxicity in 2019, and I'm pretty sure it contributed to my depression at the time. Like, I wasn't full on major depressed, but I was not happy. Something was off. And I think a lot of it had to do with the house I was living in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been studying mold since 2009. A colleague gave me Richie Shoemaker's book, and I'm glad that, more and more people are becoming aware. I had mold toxicity myself.
Yeah.
If you look at brain scans of people with MS and people with mold toxicity, you really can't distinguish the two.
Whoa.
Yeah. Richie Shoemaker, Dr. Shoemaker talks about that in his book. You can get lesions on the brain, but most importantly, I've seen a lot of people with addictions have mold toxicity because your alpha MSH hormone, which is anti-inflammatory and sort of your natural opioid, it gets depressed and lowered, and blood flow to the frontal lobe, where all of our thinking and executive functioning happens, it drops.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea. And I mean, on top of that, there's like, we've got this, all this social stress on the outside. So it's like really not surprising.
Right. Yeah. And so, when you start combining 3, 4, 5 stressors, 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 100. It's synergistic. And so I encourage people to look underneath the hood of their car, their body, at least once, preferably twice a year, and get a thorough CMP, maybe some mycotoxin testing or an organic acid test, or a microbiome test, so that you kind of have a baseline. Because
I mean, Great Plains, do you use Great Plains Labs?
Yeah, I use Great Plains for the organic acids test, because you can see some of the mold markers on there. You want them to be as close to 0.
Well, I mean, they have the whole oat test, don't they? Like the
the whole mycotoxin test?
Yeah, the mycotoxin test.
Yeah, they do. It doesn't test quite as many mycotoxins as Vibrant Labs.
Vibrant Labs?
America. Yeah.
I'm going to start using Vibrant America. That's the move.
Yeah.
All right.
So I use both. Sometimes it's just more convenient to order if I'm ordering something else from Great Plains. But yeah, based on the molecular weight, you can use different binders to sort of, grab onto all the biotoxins.
Yeah.
But they shut down, that creates the cell danger response right there.
I mean, totally.
So you're preaching to know about the flood, but it's good to have, previous ideas sort of confirmed by someone like yourself. Can you touch on tips that you give to women for different times during their cycle?
I would say that the first thing women need to know is that it is normal for you to have different energy throughout your cycle. Okay. Like, you're not taught this growing up, and you're basically forced to live in a man's world. Like, we live in a man's world. It's okay. It just is what it is. And the problem with that for us is, like, we're like constantly in and out of these like hormonal cycles, and we are not really taught how to track them properly. So I got really into, period tracking a few years ago, because I just wanted to understand what my fertility was, did I have a healthy cycle? And my cycle is pretty much always 27 to 28 days. And like, I really think women's cycles are a window into their lives, kind of like blood sugar is. Like, these cycles are going to reflect what's going on in your life. And the only time I've ever had a late period was due to stress, and it was just stress related. And I kind of look at my cycle as like it's a reflection of my life the last month, And so during the follicular phase, you have really good insulin sensitivity because you got higher estrogen levels, and you have a lot of energy. You're just like, you just feel like you can tackle the gym. You're outward facing, you're outgoing, you want to see people. And then I love when I'm ovulating, because I literally feel like I make the best videos. I feel like I look the most attractive. Like, you genuinely look and feel your most attractive during ovulation on purpose, because your body's trying to get you to copulate. And then after that, luteal phase is always a fun time, because you just notice that, like, slowly but surely over the next 2 weeks, your body's going to start being more inward oriented. You're going to feel a little bit more tired. You're going to feel a little bit more relaxed, like not want to do as much socializing. And then, and you're also a little bit less insulin sensitive. So as a result, you got to be really mindful of what you consume, what you eat, and just be really careful, because you're going to start craving carbs around your period. And if you crave chocolate around your period, you might be magnesium deficient. But your luteal phase is not the time to just like go meet the personal best in the gym. It's like, you want to use that gym time to just like stay fit and stay healthy. And I personally notice that my periods are healthier when I am regularly exercising. So it's not like don't go exercise. It's just, you're going to get a better performance benefit like near the period and your follicular phase, because your hormones are lower. And when your hormones are lowest, like during your menstrual phase, near the end of it, like you feel like you can perform more like a guy. Your menstrual phase is kind of like a window into your emotional health, which a lot of people don't realize, but it's also a window into your metabolic health. So like, if a woman misses her period, she may not be eating enough. She may not just have enough hormones, she could have anovulatory cycles. She could have PCOS. But if a woman's period's really heavy, she probably may have some estrogen dominance. She might have endometriosis. She might have fibroids. All of these are estrogen excess conditions. So like, when women are more overweight and more, sedentary and struggle with insulin resistance, you do often see that their periods can be problematic, right? But the same thing goes for women who don't eat enough. Athletes it's super common to have this thing called relative energy deficiency of a sport. I've seen this in so many girlfriends, including multiple biohackers that I know that are women. And the problem is that a woman's body is not designed to handle enormous amounts of stress, and exercise is stressful. One of the biggest problems with athletes is immune system dysfunction. And we don't talk about it, because it's like, there's this, I think, a J-shaped curve for athleticism when it comes to your immunity. Like, when you start, is it the J-shaped curve? Basically, like, you get benefits to your immune system health and your overall health, and to a point, but if you start doing like 7 days a week of exercise, you actually diminish your health, and it diminishes your longevity.
Your secretory IgA drops, right?
Yes. And like, like one of my friends is a doctor, and she's like and by the way, this happens to like the experts. So
Yeah.
I wanted to put this in the book, because I'm like, wow, like I've literally seen like world expert doctors and health coaches have these major health problems. And one of my friends, she speaks about this. She was like, I was overtraining, and then I got COVID. And I know two women who were really fit, like models, they looked like models. And they both got long COVID from being overtrained before they got sick. So man, is it important for you to protect your immune system, because, if you overdo it, you're not going to recover easily. If you don't recover, then you're not going to really get the benefits anyway from exercise. And you might actually have some detriments like immune system dysfunction.
Absolutely. Wow. You're just a bottle of energy. I love it. I love the passion that you bring. If you had to choose one or two things that you know today that you wish you would have known 7 to 10 years ago, what would you say those are?
Oh my God. The number one thing I want women to get from me, if they listen to my podcasts, is like, if I had known how much working on my relationship to myself would change my health, would change my well-being, would change my stress levels, would change my life, I would have done a lot more work on the like self-love piece. I think so. I talk to so many women all the time who struggle with eating disorders, who struggle with body image issues. And it's just so pervasive that it's like, it just breaks my heart, because I remember what it was like to be like them. And I my heart breaks because, I didn't learn this till like 38, like 37 was when I was really I spent a whole year on self-love. I was like self-love, attachment, internal family systems. I'd say since 2019, end of 2019. So 2020, 2021 and 2022, like a huge piece of my growth and development has been on personal development around healing from trauma, really working on my relationship with my parents, my attachment issues, working on my relationship with myself and self-love. And the relationship I have with myself now is like so much better than it was when I was younger. And it really just like gives me, I'm able to make changes in my behavior more effectively because I'm not trying to control my body in a way that is like, I'm like not trying to like biohack so I can be in control. I'm trying to like adapt. I'm trying to better adapt to my environment. So we talked about the word allostasis. And I think this is another big point I would want young people to know is like your body is designed to adapt to the world around you. And it is so good at doing this. And even insulin resistance is actually an adaptive response.
Yeah.
And when you look at it that way, you stop looking at your body like it's your enemy. And you start seeing, oh, wow, this is my body's way to try to adapt to stress by raising cortisol. Oh, this is my body's way of trying to adapt to stress by like waking me up in the morning to keep me safe. And like, oh, this is my body's way to adapt to a threat by making me more hypervigilant in the future if I experience further threats like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to post all your links in the show notes. What is your preferred method? So for listeners who want to contact you, I know you're not really accepting new patients, but
I mean, if you're in California, I have like a little bit of room for new patients, but not like a ton. But I definitely am still I take a small number on at a time.
okay.
So there's definitely still room for a few.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
And what's the preferred way that they contact you? Just through your website?
My website has a contact form.
Okay.
You can set up a discovery session. My discovery sessions are like, I have like 20 questions I ask you and you send me your labs and we have like a full on review of your health. And I will come up with a plan based on 1 hour. So like I can give a lot of value in an hour, but if people want to really work on their health with me, my practice is high touch, high contact. Like I'm available 24/7 to people. And it's designed as a concierge practice for people who really want to hack their health.
Right.
It's not like a massively scalable business right now, not on purpose because I'm building another business, but like it's definitely I still maintain patience because I really, really care about people.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for bringing your message to the masses. They definitely need to hear it, especially during these tumultuous times. And maybe we can have you on again in the future.
Would love it. And I'm also going to leave a link to levels with you. So if people want to get a CGM, they can do that.
Awesome. That's so great. Thank you so much, Dr. Molly.
Thank you.